and welcome to the latest episode of the Give My Head podcast with me, Tim McGarry, and my comedy colleague,
Michael McDowell.
You're very, very welcome. Episode 70 something or other. First thing we have to plug is, I can't remember when this is going out, probably the end of February, isn't it? The end of February, by the time end of February. We're on tour right now, or very soon, with the Give My Head piece going live all over Northern Ireland, and we're crossing the border a few times. We're in Dunleary, we're in Castleblaney, we're in Letterkenny. We're all over the place, and we end up in the Grand Opera House of the last week of March. So get your tickets now. We're in Derry as well on the 6th and 7th of March, in the Millennium Forum in Derry. Jason, you need to have that there.
I'm going to one of the shows.
Oh, yeah? Did you pay for it?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, wow. That is so good.
That's so good, yeah.
You and I know my partner Kelly very well. She probably would have got you in for nothing, but you paid. We've got you. That's what I think. Welcome to our very special guest today, ladies and gentlemen. Well-known local historian and... do you mind if I call you a friend? Is that okay? Jason Burke, welcome. How
Thanks.
are you?
It feels like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel of having me here.
Absolutely not, no, because we love our history. And you are Mr. History Northern Ireland. Because you
Couldn't get Rory McIlroy.
You've an excellent, you've an excellent history podcast. You do tours of cemeteries. You write for the Belfast Telegraph. You do all sorts of things. But before we talk about that, I'm wearing red just for you. Do you know why I'm wearing red?
Is it not pink?
For Cliftonville?
He's a Linfield fan.
Is it not pink?
No.
Salmon?
Is salmon pink? Is it? I would say it's red, Tim. No.
I would say it's red.
Okay.
And the same as the Give My Head piece logo, red as well for Clifton. How's Linfield doing these days? You're having trouble?
Not great. Less said about that, the better, maybe. Although I have started another podcast. I've started a Linfield podcast.
Have you?
Over the last few weeks, yeah.
Really?
It's called The Windsor Way.
Right.
And we're 4 games in now. We were 3 games in, 3 defeats in a row for the podcast. And
Right.
then we got a win at the weekend there. But yeah, it was me and a few others have gathered together, and we're trying to reflect on how things are going at Windsor Park, or how they're not going at the moment.
Because we had David Healy in here.
You did.
He was very good, but he's getting a bit of a stick, shall we
is.
say? And
He
Linfield
is.
fans are unforgiving, shall we say? Is that
Yeah, I mean, there's a feeling that Linfield fans are entitled.
Yes.
You know, we should be winning the
like
league.
Man United fans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that, and there's also a bit of people just aren't happy with the style of play, I think, at the moment. But I think David Healy, you know, for the last 10 years, he's been managing the team with his hands tied behind his back, quite frankly.
Right.
So, I mean, somebody said to me recently, he's singularly the best thing that's happened to Linfield and the worst thing that's happened to Linfield over the last 10 years, because he's worked miracles and papered over cracks, and I think
You
the
won the
natives
league
are
a
restless.
couple of years ago, and kind of even when he won the league, there was a kind of a feeling of, you know, he was still getting stick for winning the league.
Yeah, there's a bit of that.
As wonderfully as he should have won the league.
But Linfield does seem to go in cycles like that. David Jeffrey, I think you had him on the podcast too, and
yes.
he found the same thing, you know, the most successful manager in Irish League history, and his time sort of came to an end as well, you know, and I'm not saying David Healy's time's coming to an end, but he's finding it tough at the minute, shall we say.
Right. How did you get Linfield? Is that a family thing, or were you from originally?
East Belfast.
East
Yeah, so I'm a fifth columnist.
Oh,
A fifth columnist, East Belfast Linfield supporter.
don't like that. Yeah, Glentoran fans do not like that.
No, they don't. Although I revelled in it in my younger years, but no, it is a family thing. So there's sort of one side of my family's from Sandy Row. My granny worked in the Linfield Mill, actually, where the team was born in 1886. And another sort of section of the family, when I looked at the family tree, was from the Shankill Road, and so there's that strong Linfield thing. So yeah, when I was at school, there wasn't many Linfield fans about.
Yeah, at East Belfast. Where did you go to school?
So originally I went to Euston Street Primary. So I grew up in the lower part of the Woodstock Road.
Right.
I went to Euston Street, and then we sort of moved up the Krieger Road then, and then I changed school, moved to Hardy Memorial, and then I ended up at Grosvenor.
Right. Oh, Grosvenor. Good. Was Sammy Wilson teaching there at that time?
He wasn't teaching me, unfortunately, but he was economics.
Yeah. Sammy, did you know that?
I didn't know
Sammy
that,
Wilson.
Yeah, I remember didn't he lambast the Green Party leader Stephen Ague one time in the Assembly chamber about whoever taught him economics. It turned out Sammy had actually taught him economics.
Very good.
Sammy used to turn up on a motorbike or something. Motorbikes. But you didn't do. You got into history very on. Did you just always love history? Did you have?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but if you humour me for a while, I'll tell you.
So, give me a couple of minutes.
What age are you, by the way? You're a young thing. You're horribly
I'm
young.
only 38.
This
You met so 30. What was it? 26 from 38. Well, you're a ceasefire baby virtually, aren't you?
Born 1987.
From 1987, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I remember the sort of the tail end of the dark days,
right,
if we put it like that.
Right.
But yeah, I went to Grosvenor, and I mean, I did all right. I wasn't pulling up any trees, but history was always my strongest subject, and then whenever you're faced with the prospect of going to university and picking what you're going to do, then history seemed the obvious one to me. But I actually didn't get the grades to get into Queen's to do history, so you can clip this whenever the kids are getting their A-level results later in the year. It's a historian who didn't get the grades to get into Queen's to do history, but through one means or another, I was able to get in via the back door and do ancient history and politics with slightly lesser grades. And then you can change after a year, and I did change, and I changed to modern history. And to cut a very long story short, then again was just doing enough to get by. wasn't pulling up any trees. And then it was made pretty clear to me in third year at university that if you don't start pulling first class scores out of the bag, you're not even going to get a 2-1. This whole thing's going to have been a waste of time.
Right.
And I was able to do it. I pulled the first class scores out of the bag, did a really good dissertation on the First World War, which we'll probably come on to. But within that then there was a bit of a light bulb went off, and I got a bit of a bug then for research and doing the history. And most of my best work then came after I left university, because I continued it on then in my spare time, and then I almost sort of fell into the role of being a historian purely because of this interest in the First World War, which at the time was being commemorated heavily in East Belfast, and we were approaching the centenary. So before you know it, you're being offered to do a talk, write a piece for the newspaper, and all of that. And
but you're only in your 20s at that stage.
Very young, yeah. The first talk that I did was in a community centre on the Newton Road, and there was a bar. There was an open bar at the back of the room, and the people were sitting drinking tins of harp and stuff. And I thought, is this what it's like to be a historian? You know, I can't even remember if I got paid or anything for it, but I was really just cutting my teeth then, and I was really sort of touting myself. I was offering articles to the local newspaper, the East Belfast Community Telegraph or whatever it was called at the time, and I wrote this article about a war memorial on the Woodstock Road, and how the community memory of that memorial didn't necessarily marry up with the facts as I had found them during my research. And without getting into all the details of it, essentially the men on this memorial on the Woodstock Road didn't necessarily follow the trajectory of signing the Covenant, joining the UVF, fighting at the Battle of the Somme, and then the war ends. There was a whole lot of complexity within it. So I wrote this article and thought nothing more of it. And then I was walking down the Woodstock Road one day, and someone, are you allowed to swear on this podcast?
Oh, yes.
Someone shouted across the road at me, yo, are you that wee bollocks that wrote that article in the newspaper? And I said, yes, I am. And his parting shot was, we're not up for your revisionism.
Oh, right, okay.
So it was a bit of a baptism of fire.
Right, okay. Not up for these facts and stuff.
Not up for these facts, yeah. It was what Donald Trump said, we've had enough of facts and experts.
We see, the thing of me and Michael and Damon are amateur historians, love history, always loved it. We met studying law at Queen's University. I loved history, did a history A-level, was going to do a history degree, and we were, there's no point in doing that, there's no jobs in history. There's no jobs in history.
Yeah.
You love history, ancient history, all history.
Yeah.
So when we're writing, we don't really like writing, it's a pain in the arse, so we sit around and talk about why did Hitler invade?
What was he thinking?
What was he thinking? Should the Carthaginians have won the Punic War? So we always loved that. And that's what we got. We always loved it.
Yeah.
But you go to like First World War. I think the first time I encountered you, was it long and the short of it that we got you on the radio show?
Yeah, I think I did the radio show, which was about home rule, and then you came on one of my walking tours.
Yes.
And even how the walk. It's interesting you're saying there about jobs and trying to find your way in the world of history after having studying it.
Yeah, because it's not an easy way to make a living.
Very rarely do you meet someone who studied history is actually practicing it or working in the world of heritage. But I realised early on that I was going to have to carve something out for myself. No one was going to give me the dream job that I wanted, which at that time I was studying the First World War, researching it in my own time, really trying to write a book in the background, doing these talks, doing these articles, not getting any money for it. And then eventually I ended up back at Queen's doing the Masters, and I was skint, quite frankly, and couldn't afford to pay the fees. And I'd sold everything that I had, guitars, expensive clothes, anything that I had at sold.
Linfield season ticket.
Linfield season. And I thought, what else have I got that I can sell? Well, I've got my knowledge. I've got this stuff that I've been creating over the last few years. Maybe if I put together a little trail, gullible people like Tim McGarry might pay a tenner for a ticket and come along and listen to me talking about the First World War. And I put one on, and it's sold out. And all of a sudden I realised I was on to something. So I had no training in doing tours, or I've no tour guide qualification or anything like that. But often I think the best tours and the best tour guides are people who can tell the best stories. And so people like Tom Hartley and Eamon Phoenix, I doubt they had any tour guiding qualifications to their names, same as me. And so I started on this idea then of doing tours. And
we'll talk about Eamon Phoenix in a minute, but I did a tour. I did the East Belfast tour, First World War tour, which is fascinating. It's about it is about streets, literally, and people. And we, again, I do the thing with David Hume about our history and shared history and divided history and all that sort of stuff. But you went to there were lots of people from Catholic areas of Belfast fought in the First World War as well. It's not just, as you say, the UVF 36th Ulster Division. Stuff like
that was one of the things that came out of my research, was this sort of untold story of the sacrifice from the Short Strand, and several hundred people from the Short Strand district or St Matthew's parish who served in the First World War, including, for example, the Rooney brothers. I might have told this story on the tour, but the story of two young Catholic lads who actually found themselves in the ranks of the 36th Ulster Division. One of them dies on the 1st of July. The other one sees his brother literally being blown to pieces on the battlefield, but comes home, and the effects of the war, really, because of his injuries and his mental health, means that his whole world falls apart. He ends up losing his wife. He walks away from his kids. He ends up in a hospital bed in the 1970s, dying, quite frankly, and he's ranting about being back in the trenches again of the First World War, and that was the last sort of memory that he had and took to his deathbed. And that was just one family within the Short Strand, two Catholic lads, the Rooneys, who find themselves in the ranks of the 36th Ulster Division, or, for example, the only person which I have anecdotal evidence for, who wore a sash going across no man's land.
Well, was that true? Yeah,
we don't know, but in one of the local newspapers, they reported on this heroic act of a man called Sammy Kelly, who supposedly wore a sash going across no man's land on the 1st of July. And when I looked at his address, he lived right in the heart of the Short Strand. Now, he was a Protestant man. He was involved with the UVF and stuff, but his address is quite literally in the heart of today's Republican Short Strand. Or, for example, the only person that we know from the Short Strand who took part in the Easter Rising, for example, was actually wearing the British uniform.
Oh, wow.
Edward John Hanna.
Right.
So there's all these little complexities. Yeah.
See, that's what I love about history. I do love all that. But people would say, like, why do we need to bother about this? It was a long time ago. Can we not get over ourselves? I mean, First World War, very, very important. Without the First World War, we don't have the 1916 Easter Rising. You don't have probably Northern Ireland. You don't have, that whole period is the whole world.
World War, you have
it's still very, very important. But do people want to know about it in detail, about fascinating stories like that, or do they want to see the broader picture? Why do you think it's important to us?
Well, for me, the First World War is the single most central experience in Irish history. I don't think, for all the reasons that you've just said there, I don't think you can look past it. That's at the macro. When you deal with the micro then, and you deal at sort of granular level in East Belfast, it's very much part of people's identity. Yeah. And that's kind of what I found then by writing that article, and that guy railing against me on the Woodstock Road. By me sort of challenging that narrative, I was challenging those building blocks of his memory and his identity. Yeah. So
you were basically saying you were less British than you thought. Is that sort of thing?
Yeah,
basic as that.
I definitely remember
people construct sort of historical memories, and they're comfortable for them.
Yeah,
and then they don't like them being challenged. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, if I take the example of that specific memorial that I'm talking about in the Woodstock Road, everybody in that area grew up with this story that all the men on that, there's 64 men on this memorial, that they were all in the UVF, they all died at the Battle of the Somme. In fact, whenever I was doing the research, there was a single flag on that memorial, and it was the flag of the 36th Ulster Division. And all of a sudden I started scratching beneath the surface and finding that only maybe a third of the men on that memorial followed that trajectory. And I sort of stopped in my tracks when I was writing the dissertation at the time and thought, should I actually be writing this? Because this is going to challenge everything that everybody in this area believes. But I thought, well, that's the job of the historian, is to challenge those narratives. Whether or not any of my research has had any impact on how people actually remember that history is a different matter. I've certainly tried, but it would be interesting to go along to that memorial again and hear what's being said and hear what way it's being remembered.
Do you think that is the job of the historian, to challenge narratives, to tell people that it's not as simple as you thought?
I certainly see it as my role. I mean, history is vitally important for all different reasons. I think it gives us a sense of how and why things are the way they are, if that makes sense. But I think then that's the baseline. And from that, then I think people take all different purposes from it. So people will take it for political purposes to bolster a particular political argument, whether that be reconciliatory value or whether that be to support an armed campaign. For me, it takes on a purpose because it's my job now, quite frankly, and so I see that purpose in it, you know. But
you see somebody like Donald Trump, who's clearly never read a history book in his life, doesn't understand the history of anything. And that's quite dangerous, that somebody doesn't really know why Ukraine is Ukraine, why, you know, how South America came about. He doesn't understand any of that and just thinks, it's today, I want the royal, blah, 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 he does whatever but he's no sense of history.
But I don't know about that, because, I mean, he's informed by, you know, he is informed by history. I mean, the reason they're going into Venezuela, I know this is going to be a few weeks after that, but that's oil, and there's no... That's historically what they've done. They have intervened, and there's a Monroe Doctrine. So he is. If he's not read a history book, he's certainly aware of the historical drive.
So he's got it. He's got it in his genes because America is the greatest country in the world and won World War II by itself.
And then Ukraine is an echo, I think, of American isolationism in the 30s. I mean, it's clearly that's the view. What are we involved in there? You know what I mean?
It is, for example, why I don't subscribe to the idea that history is important, because you have to learn from your mistakes. You know, you hear that thing said all the time, but quite frankly, if you look at the state of the world today, as you've just said, who's learning from the mistakes? You know,
exactly,
and that's why I often think that if you had historians in some of these important rooms in world affairs, like the Oval Office or Cobra meetings or something, if there were more historians in those rooms, then you might give yourself a better chance of learning from the mistakes, you know, but not quite sure we are.
Well, funny enough, it's very esoteric here, but we were talking about, you know, William Dalrymple, who did the Anarchy, and the historian who did the whole thing with the East India Company. They brought him in. He was in America and he was promoting his book, and he happened to be in the same flight as Mohammad Kazi, the guy who was the Prime Minister of Afghanistan.
Right.
And they had this big conversation, and he started telling him, he said, I didn't know that. The guy who was the Prime Minister didn't know all this history.
The Prime Minister of Afghanistan
didn't know all this history. So he tell it, and he said apparently then arrived in the White House, Kazi, and basically turned on the Americans. And the guy said, what happened there? What happened with him? And he said, I was speaking to this guy, Dalrymple. I had to try to hunt this guy down. And he got a warning. He got a warning from the security force saying,
Stop telling people
their history. Yeah,
you see. Yeah. You see how important it is. You and I, did you know Eamon Phoenix well? Did you?
Yeah, Eamon Phoenix has had a big influence on my career, to be honest. So in that period after I left university the first time round...
So, sorry, some people may not know who Eamon Phoenix, because he passed away a few years ago, but
saying.
Basically one of the finest historians this country produced, absolute genius. But he made history come to life, and he full of anecdotes and stories, and not just the broader picture. He knew the basic facts, but he brought it to life, and he was on the BBC all the time. He was on the long and the short of it a few times. Lovely man. Talk too much. We did one, myself and David Hume did one episode about Mary Ann McCracken in Clifton House, and I asked him one question, and 27 and a half minutes later he ended the answer to the question. But a great man, and he was a big influence on you.
He was, and sorely missed, not just by me, but I think by wider society as well. Been described as our historian laureate, which I think is actually a fair title to give him. But in that period after I left university, I sort of encountered Eamon Phoenix. He was teaching at the time the lifelong learning course at Stranmillis. So I was sort of signing up for additional courses and things just to kind of bolster my knowledge. And he seemed to take a bit of a shine to me, and he was encouraging me to write and encouraging me to do more talks. And for whatever reason, he saw something in me that I didn't particularly see myself. But I think sadly now, in his passing, there's been a huge void has been left.
Yeah.
I think in terms of broadcasting as well, as you've mentioned there, I do get the sense that the BBC and other outlets are sort of scratching round now for a voice like Eamon's to sort of to fill that space.
Yeah, it's a great turn of phrase, and he was really very articulate.
Yeah, and he just had it. There often has been times where the BBC have offered me to come on shows about obscure things, and I would say, I need a week to think about that, and they would say, Eamon Phoenix would just come on in 10 minutes, I'm not even Phoenix, But we had some great stories to tell about Eamon Phoenix, like the time. As I say, he was always sort of encouraging me to do things and take part in things. And this one particular day, I think he might have phoned me, and he said that he was taking a bus tour to Dublin of UDA ex-prisoners, and would I come along and help him? He says, I'll do a bit and you do a bit, and between the two of us, we'll make it work. And part of this was a visit to Kilmainham Jail. Right. And then Eamon Phoenix was then going to do a bus tour of Dublin city centre, and it was going to be a bit of a double-hander between me and him. And Eamon, he would always sort of turn up late for things and always be a bit sort of dishevelled and things. So he gave you the impression of someone who was a bit disorganised, and I've seen him give lectures from notes which are scribbled around the edge of the Irish newspapers. Other newspapers are available, but scribbled around the edge of the Irish News. And so we arrive at Kilmainham Jail, and the jail's closed. After travelling for 2.5 hours to get down there. And it was all a bit awkward for a while. And then one of the ex-prisoners sort of stepped forward and said, Eamon, do you mean to say we've tried to stay out of jail all our lives and now you're telling us that we can't get in? And Eamon, to his credit then, was able to ring the Taoiseach's office, and someone came down and opened Kilmainham Jail. Wow. So that's the clout that Eamon Phoenix has. Okay. Someone opened the jail. We were able to go
UDA into jail, yeah.
And so then we go on then round Dublin city centre, and he's regaling the bus with tales of the Battle of Mount Street Bridge and how important this was, and we couldn't find Mount Street Bridge, so he was directing the bus driver and taking the tour at the same time, you see, and I could see we've driven around this same place about 3 times here, and he sort of apologised. He says, "I'm very sorry, we're going to pull over and ask this lady here if she can tell us where it is." So we pulled over, and he came back on the bus then with his tail between his legs. It was a statue at the side of the street that he'd get off to ask for directions, and the whole bus was in stitches. But yeah, that's one of many stories I could tell about Eamon Phoenix.
Such a good guy. He was on the long and the short of it quite a few times, but very, very articulate and very. Eamon came from a sort of vaguely nationalist background, but you never got that impression. But do you get a bit of that because your background? People go, well, he's a unionist historian. Eamon maybe, has a slight tinge of vague nationalism attached to it.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between being a unionist historian and a historian who happens to be a unionist or from a unionist background, and Eamon had a great ability to be able to speak to all sides and none. I think I remember a story when after he just passed away that the Orange Order were consulting him about the particular date in which the country was formed, in terms of the celebration for the creation of Northern Ireland, and Eamon Phoenix was the person that they went to. So he was quite comfortable with that.
I think he said there were 5 dates for the government.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, it was the Government of Ireland Act 1920, it was for Parliament 1921. Boundary Commission 1925 and a couple of other ones. The Boundary Commission, asked Dan about the
Dan loves Boundary Commission.
The Boundary Commission.
You've covered the Boundary Commission a lot, haven't you?
Well, no, yeah. on another podcast, the Irish History Boys.
Keep it coming.
We love a bit of Boundary Commission. So Eamon, yeah, he give advice to everybody, basically.
Yeah. And I like to think that I can do the same, but you're quite right. People like to pigeonhole you.
Yes.
And that could be difficult at times.
Well, it's good for me and David Hume because we like to be pigeonholed and then argue with each other.
You agree too much.
We're starting to.
Editing that you're sitting agreeing a lot.
That's the sad thing. You now know because you now know the more you look into history, the less black and white it is. The less kind of we were right, they were wrong. Yeah. The less there are good guys and bad guys because everybody's acting as they did. take 100 years ago, nobody knows what anybody was feeling.
No.
They didn't know what it was going to be like in 2026, so they're acting in their own period of time. So you can't gainsay a lot of motivations and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was speaking to Tom Hardy one time, and he said to me, do you know, Jason, there's no them and us. It's just us in all our complexity. I think that just sums it all up for me.
I like ATQ Stewart's quote, Tony Stewart. I never met him, obviously. I call him Tony like I knew him. ATQ Stewart. Very well. Tony wrote a couple of brilliant books about Irish history. Right, and he said, no Irishman knowingly understates a grievance. which is the whole thing about Irish history, that people take their Irish history and go, right, the Brits did this, and I haven't got over Oliver Cromwell, burning down this, or the black and tans or whatever. There is still a large element of that. Do you see your role as kind of undermining that, or do you kind of just feel that, well, let people nurture their grievances and use history? People do use history as a big stick to beat the other side.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think a lot of the talks and things that I get pulled into tend to be on a sort of cross-community basis, and so you feel as though you've got a role to play. I mean, Eamon Phoenix would have taken that reconciliatory thing very seriously, and I think there's a difference between setting out to do history that way, writing history with reconciliation in mind, because I think that'll skew what you're actually trying to do. Or all of a sudden you find yourself in a community hall with two sets of ex-prisoners and you're having to talk about the 1920s troubles. You have to navigate your way through those choppy waters, very intelligently. And so it's something that does weigh on you when you're trying to do these things.
I took a couple of your tours. I took the World War I one, which was brilliant, and then City Cemetery,
Belfast City Cemetery.
Which is,
you love a cemetery, don't you?
I do love a cemetery, not as much as David Hume. David Hume loves a graveyard. Oh, that poor man's wife. Everywhere he goes, he loves a cemetery, and he's from Ballycarry, which has a superb cemetery.
It does actually,
excellent cemetery. Yeah. City Cemetery is packed full of stuff, and again, you go to the City Cemetery, and it's in the heart of West Belfast. It's on the Falls Road. Yeah. And who's buried there? Who was the gunrunner, Lauren gunrunner?
Freddie Crawford.
Freddie Crawford, arch-unionist of arch-unionists, buried in West Belfast. And you think, what? How the hell did he end up there? And of course, it was the demographic change.
Thomas Sinclair, the man who wrote the Ulster Covenant as well, is buried.
Is he in there as well?
Yeah. Elisha Scott, who has he played for Liverpool for the longest period of time, holds the record as a Liverpool goalkeeper. Yeah. So lots of fascinating characters there. And it's also where I met my partner. She came on one of my tours.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, you smooth bastard. Hello. Want to see this gravestone? Really? That's what you met her?
That's what we met. She came on one of my tours, and we met. We met on the underground wall which separates the Protestants and Catholics.
That's right. People don't know that story, but there is a wall underneath. Whose fault was that? Is that the Teagues or the Prods? Who insisted on the wall?
It's the Catholic Church. Yeah.
No.
So it's all about Catholic canon law.
It's always us, isn't it?
It is always you. It is always you.
That's Irish history summarised. It's always us.
Yeah, you just couldn't put up with some people coming over. A few people visiting.
Because there's genuinely a wall under, and it's buried. You can't see it now, but the wall was built to separate Catholic burials from Protestant burials, because the city cemetery was a city.
Were they worried about seepage? It's always the worry. They weren't going to move. Well, the bodies weren't going to move. So what?
But you see, the Protestantism would have gone into the soil, infected the soil. I don't know what was what period.
Well, you're quite right.
What period are we talking about?
So the cemetery opened in 1869.
Right.
They'd start building it in around 1866, and at that time, the decision by the Belfast Corporation was that it was going to be an interdenominational burial ground.
Right. You see, because us Tees, we didn't have anything. Same Glasnevin, we weren't allowed to bury our dead, even with penal laws. You see.
Well, that was interdenominational there. No, so would it be? You would have been allowed to.
No, penal laws weren't even allowed our own. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead. No, we'll not get into it.
Okay.
Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. There was a portion of the cemetery allocated then for the Catholics of Belfast to bury their dead. However, because of Catholic canon law, it meant, the ground had to be consecrated.
Right.
But if there was a stillborn child, if someone had taken their own life, if someone had converted from Catholicism to Protestantism, they wouldn't be entitled to be buried in the Catholic blessed ground. Wow. So there was many disputes over who could and couldn't be buried in that section of the ground, but also that consecrated ground had to be separated from the rest of the cemetery. So it wasn't just Protestants, because there's Muslims and all sorts buried in Belfast City Cemetery. So it was to separate the Catholic blessed ground from the rest.
And it's a physical wall.
It's a physical wall which runs 9 feet
underneath?
deep.
What's that about?
But just
Yeah.
Why underground?
Was it underground now, or is it underground? When it was
No, it
built?
always was underground. Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting because there's a Jewish section in the cemetery, and the wall there, which separates the Jewish section, is above ground.
Yeah.
So again, it must be something within Catholic teachings. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Well, they
you
got
can
a bit
explain
weird.
yourself.
Well, they got a bit weird. I mean, in Milltown, there was an awful story about, as you say, the consecrated baby,
Right.
the limbo babies.
Oh, the limbo babies,
was
yeah,
awful. With babies who weren't baptized before they died.
Yeah.
Technically weren't Catholics,
Yeah.
but they were in limbo until the end of the world or whatever. So they weren't buried in consecrated ground, and they were kind of dumped to the one side. And it was a horrible story.
Yeah.
Sorry, we've cheered ourselves up. It's a very light-hearted podcast, by the way.
And apparently that's why the Catholic Church is actually one of the main motivations for getting rid of limbo recently was because of the spread of Islam in Africa, because Islam don't have that rule,
Right.
and it was and because of the mortality rate in Africa was much higher. So a lot of people were going,
This is like a BBC
Islamic.
podcast.
It is. We are moving
entertaining and informing as we go along. But City Cemetery is a fascinating place, full of all sorts of really interesting people. Not just our, sectarian history. I mean, there's all sorts of very famous people there who are worth revisiting, aren't there?
Yeah, as I mentioned, sports people there. So you've Elisha Scott, that Liverpool goalkeeper that I was telling you about. Rinty Monaghan, boxer, who won a world championship. Who else have we got there?
See, he's run out. If Eamon Phoenix was here, he'd have rhymed off 30 names like that.
Let's go to that graveyard. There's 5 things to see.
But I would recommend, I would generally recommend Jason's tour. Are you still doing the tours, by the way? Am I recommending something you're not doing anymore? But you've started your own, have you gone out in your own website and your own business?
Yeah, sort of. I've been working recently.
Or you've found your woman and you don't care anymore. You don't give a shit. I've cracked it all over now.
No, up until recently, I was working for Hearth, the Historic Buildings Trust, and they sort of look after historic buildings across the country. And I was working on the redevelopment of Riddle's Warehouse on Ann Street.
Right.
So it's a big Victorian ironmongery warehouse just next to Musgrave Barracks in the centre of Belfast. But all these things are kind of, as lots of the heritage jobs at the minute tend to be, they're sort of funding dependent. And so because of funding, I've had to go part-time recently, which has allowed me the opportunity to try and go out on my own. So through a mixture of tours, writing for the Belfast Telegraph, doing talks, doing consultancy, podcasts, I'll try to make my own way as a historian.
We're kind of obsessed with history, and then we kind of let things like the assembly rooms go to shit. Sorry to swear on my own podcast. Yeah, we allowed it to go to shit. It's the assembly rooms, which were from the 1790s.
It's the oldest public building in Belfast.
Harper's Festival.
1769.
Was that where the great debate about slavery was held as well?
Thomas McCabe.
Thomas McCabe, ex St Malachy's boy. He's got a plaque at St Malachy's in vicinage. That's where he used to live on the Lower Antrim Road. Yeah. Did you know that? The talk of it being saved, is there?
Belfast City Council have bought it recently.
So
they bought it for just short of about £3 million.
Right.
It's probably going
to turn it into a disco or something, or a club.
Well, that's one of the better ideas that I've heard for, to be honest. It remains to be seen what it's going to be, but I imagine it's probably going to take another £10 million worth of investment to get that up to scratch. So it proves that it can be done, and other buildings there like Riddle's Warehouse and Craigavon House, for example, over in East Belfast.
Where I met, we filmed in Craigavon House, which is the home of James Craig, obviously, and a beautiful building.
I could not believe
it's incredible space.
And it's gone to complete ruin.
And apparently not that. I mean, we were talking to what's the one who runs the
Carol?
Somme. Yeah, Carol, and she was saying that it had actually been reasonably intact 10 years ago. It was actually not in that bad a condition. Now it's the roof's starting to fall in. It's terrible.
And recently there was a thing in the paper about Craig's own grave at Stormont
Right.
which is falling into disrepair, which is really interesting because James Craig, the founder of Northern Ireland, remember the man who won the Boundary Commission? Dan, James Craig, he got everything he wanted, not an inch. James Craig, Ireland's longest-serving Prime Minister.
Yeah.
We did a radio version with Eamon Phoenix about James Craig, and we went to visit the grave, and it's at the side of Stormont Building, but it's not really well visited and not really well known about.
Yeah.
And it's now a TV guy was going, listen, this has been allowed to fall into disrepair. And we kind of, is that because Craig's fallen out of favour? Because, we all remember Carson, but is Craig kind of forgotten about? Or is he too much like hard work? Or is it kind of, you never get something past the Assembly about James Craig, do you think?
It's maybe a bit reflective of his role that he had along with Edward Carson. He did prefer to be in the background whenever he and Carson were together. Carson gets the statue at the front of Stormont. Yeah. James Craig's is inside at the top of the staircase. And Carson, of course, as you know, because you made the documentary on him, he's buried in St Anne's Cathedral. Yeah. I had a group of students there just before Christmas who were fascinated at the prospect of seeing Edward Carson's grave in there. And to quote Eamon Phoenix again, he said that he thinks Carson would be spinning in his grave because the soil of the 6 counties was put on top of him. It was everything that he was opposed to.
He's a Dublin man.
Yeah, but I would dare say much more people would visit the tomb of Carson than they would of James Craig.
Yeah. No, Craig has been somewhat more controversial, can we say?
Yeah, but it is just interesting that we do. We are. I do think Irish people, especially in the north, probably because of our recent history, are obsessed by history, but we don't seem to protect the monuments that exist and the sort of the actual material structures that are part of our history.
It was W.B. Yeats who said, being Irish, he had an abiding sense of tragedy, which sustained him through temporary periods of joy. Which means that Irish people enjoy the miserable side of history. Particularly nationalists seem to enjoy penal laws and famine and Cromwell and we've been impressed. Well, it gives you a sense of purpose, maybe.
Yeah.
Whereas unionism, slightly different approach to. Well, I suppose there's still the whole thing about. We did one about 1641 rising, the killing of Protestants, and David Hume and various people saying this still informs unionist psyche today. What happened virtually 400 years, almost 400 years ago. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, again, it's back to what I was saying earlier, that these elements of memory are the building blocks of identity. And so if you consider 1641, 1690, 1916, all these building blocks of the memory.
But you seem to win more than we did. We were always losing. We were always getting a kicking. Yeah, 60 Battle of Conceal, Boyne. We were always losing.
You lined up with the big. We were lined up with the big boys. You weren't.
The Brits.
The Brits. Yeah.
But it does still inform unionist opinion today, doesn't it? Inform unionist psyche.
I think it does, and you can see it played out in the streets and street politics in terms of the parading, for example, and you can hear it coming through in some of the rhetoric of some of our politicians as well. But I think it's fair to say that similar can be said of the other side as well. Trying to remain balanced in all this,
that's okay. That's okay. It's interesting that recent history of the Troubles is still very, very disputed and will be presumably under the whole thing about the Republicans were able to take over the narrative, they say, and the Troubles history is so. Do you avoid Troubles history, or do you kind of want to get involved in Troubles history, or is it too soon to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean,
in
personally,
a way that is as objective as we can be.
Personally, I do try and avoid it. And really that comes from the idea of me delivering the tours and stuff in Belfast City Centre. I mean, other than the Belfast City Cemetery tour, I do other tours in Belfast City Centre. But there's so many people doing the sort of Troubles history, Troubles tourism thing. Naturally I've just tried to stay away from that. But also, back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of being pigeonholed, you're not belong being pigeonholed if you start talking about the Troubles for too long, quite frankly. Yeah. Although it has come through maybe some of my articles. I mean, for the Belfast Telegraph, I've been trying to write the history of Belfast streets. And it's impossible to write a history of Belfast streets without mentioning some of the atrocities and things that happened on them. But you always just try and do it in a balanced way, and that's all that you can do.
Yeah. We did a series, which we're very proud of, called Pop Goes Northern Ireland, about the Troubles, which was basically archive footage with the music. But the thing we did about that, clever thing we did, we only a used archive of the time. So we never had anybody, Gerry Adams coming on, well, he only said that in 1973 because da-da-da-da-da. There was no justification. That's exactly what they said at the time. And I think that worked very well for us, and that kind of, the thing speaks for itself.
Well, I found it, because I did a lot of the, but I cut it and stuff, and I found going through it, I mean, I thought I knew a lot of stuff, and then suddenly you went, well, actually, I don't really know that. I mean, I thought I knew about Bloody Sunday.
Again, the Troubles is far more complicated than you think, and it goes in phases, and it's never black and white. And
Absolutely,
there's so many different.
And I think there's also that whole, you were talking about, why do we always lose, and this that overarching presence of Britain, that we think, they have this master plan and they're controlling us, and when you looked at going through that archive, you suddenly realize these guys really are just reacting to things. They really don't know what they're doing. They really
not all of history.
Yeah, well, it's just reactive. It's not. There's no real plan. There was no real plan. I mean, the only real plan ever came probably was Heath trying to do Sunnydale, and then when Blair came along. But up to that point, it's just reactive. There's no real thought or process to it, and you kind of go. So it's not that they had some great scheme. I mean, what I think is one of the tragedies of the Troubles, in my view, is it could have been, and you will say it in '74, we could have had it sorted out in a long time before than it needed to be. Yeah. But we didn't have to go on for as long.
See, you cheer yourself up, right?
Yeah, but it's true.
87, you were born.
87, yeah.
That's just, man, 87.
So, but that's the thing
We
about
left
history.
university at that stage.
I know. But you see, I just think history's fascinating because I just think is what you said about its unintended consequences.
Well,
It's
do
not
we
people-
take ourselves too seriously, and are we obsessed with our own wee problems? And we're kind of irrelevant. Part of the thing about looking at the Troubles in various pages of Irish history is the Brits don't really care that much.
No, it's
They don't really, and we're kind of, as you say, 74. We're obsessed. Sunningdale, UWC strike. The Brits kind of were dealing with other things.
Yeah,
they were dealing, and we were the side issue. Always been a side. We've never really been central to the whole issue of Britain, really, have we? To British politics. You see?
No, we certainly haven't.
But I'm saying, are we overplaying our importance in the world? Do we see ourselves are we too myopic and think, are we too parochial rather than seeing ourselves in a wider picture?
Yeah, I think there is an element of that. Was it Liam Kennedy wrote a book called The Most Oppressed People Ever?
Yes.
The Irish.
The Mope, yeah.
I mean, that gives you a sense of where Liam Kennedy's approaching things from. But also, I think whenever you read the book, you do realise that we do get caught up in our own sense of importance without realising that there's a whole bigger picture out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you're saying about the First World War. I mean, it's impacting Ireland is right, but all across Europe. I mean, the Empire's fall, Russian Revolution. You mean it's massive. I mean, yes, it affects Ireland, but it affects everywhere. I mean, it's a huge thing.
Well, taking away Troubles in politics, there's a community history as well. You do tours around Belfast. There was a wee thing recently about what's the wee statue of? Is it Oliver? Who was the statue found of recently? Oh, little
Charlie Chaplin.
Charlie Chaplin statue in a house somewhere in Belfast.
Yeah, it's about that size.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just off Joy Street, so so I covered that I think in one of the articles that I did for the Belfast Telegraph. It turns out that Charlie Chaplin was here for a very short time, for a couple of performances, and he lodged in a house in Joy Street.
Right.
Not quite sure which house, but a house in Joy Street. And I think somebody maybe redeveloped a building there, and just to sort of tip their hat to that memory, there's a little statue. It must only be about that size, and it's at the top of the building, so you wouldn't even know it's there unless someone pointed it out to you. So, yeah, and I think there's a mural to Charlie Chaplin as well on the other side of May Street.
Mural to Charlie Chaplin. I didn't know he was in the The bowler hat should have given it away. But history like that, I mean, you delve into sort of the history of all sorts of streets in Belfast and do that in a podcast. You do that for the Telegraph as well, don't you?
Yeah, so mostly for the Telegraph, and the idea came from there was a book published maybe about 4 or 5 years ago by another sort of historian friend of mine called Donal O'Fallon. He did a history of Dublin in 12 streets.
Right.
And it wasn't, just a chronological history of the streets. It was trying to find interesting things and interesting stories that happened on the streets and then sort of stitch them together. And it just so happened that the editor of the Telegraph at the time just recently moved on there, Owen Brannigan. I don't know if you've come across him, but he's a Dubliner as well. And he said to me, have you read this book? It's bloody brilliant. I says, I have, and I've often thought that somebody should be doing that for Belfast. And he says, well, why don't you write a few of these for the Telegraph and we'll give them a go? And so I picked 10 streets. And then away we went, and people seemed to like them. But again, it's not just the idea of giving people a verbatim history of the street.
Yeah,
It's trying to find
Yeah.
interesting things that happened on the street and then weave it all together with a bit of poetry and a bit of music and things like that tied up within it.
Okay. Your partner, congratulations. You get married soon?
We'll get married at some point. We're engaged and
that's all right.
we've got a baby due as well.
Have you got a baby due?
We've got a baby due at the end of
Whoa,
April.
you say you heard it here first. I didn't know.
Is it the first podcast, baby?
Congratulations. Oh, my congratulations, yes. I met her, we were out one night.
Oh, yeah.
Had a few drinks.
Yeah.
She's not a historian. She doesn't.
She's not a historian, but she does like her history.
Yeah, she went to.
She would need to.
City cemetery. Like,
She would need to.
Does she sit in the front of your gigs and go on?
She does come along to most of my gigs. She's my number one fan. Yeah.
Is that right?
Oh, wow.
She gets to see all the behind the scenes stuff. Like she sees me being very nervous this morning before I left the house,
Is that
for
right?
example.
You're
Or
nervous?
she sees all the work that goes into these talks and walks and all that kind of thing.
She has access all areas. Like
She can sit with the guys drinking harp in the car. Oh, yeah, boy. Tell us about the 36th Ulster. But there's work involved in being an historian as well. I mean, you can't just spoof it. I mean, do you spend a long time reading, researching, sitting in libraries, at the Public Records Office and stuff as well?
Yeah, I
Do you?
mean, as much as I feel like I'm bluffing it and spoofing it here today, to be honest, but no, Donald Fallon, to mention Donald Fallon again, he said to me a few years ago when I was down in Dublin doing a talk, he said, you know, Jason, somebody once said to me, if you want to make it in this world as a historian, you have to marry somebody with a real job. And that always stuck with me. But yes, there is quite a lot of work that's
There is
required.
quite a lot of work. There was a certain historian, I'll not give his name, but he was on the long and the short of it, and I was driving him home one time, and he said, do you know the collective name for a group of historians? I said, no. He said, a malice of historians. I said, a what? A malice? He said, well, certain historians, particularly academic historians, and you're academic, but you're not. You're kind of reaching out to people.
Yeah,
and trying to-
public history is what I describe.
Public historian. I mean, he said, but there are academic historians who write books that are going to be read by 100 people, most of whom are other historians. And he said 50% of them will go, you wanker, what are you talking about there? You're an idiot, you don't know anything about agriculture in 17th century Greece. And it's a massive, so you write these academic books,
Yeah.
and all you do is get abuse from other historians.
Well, it's not just that. It's like we like doing the program. There's historians. You won't be on with other historians. If he's on, I'm not on. Okay, right.
Hence why Jason hasn't been on.
No, thankfully I haven't faced any of that
You
yet.
haven't
but,
faced
but,
any
but you're right that
academic rivalries?
No, not necessarily, but you know, it is interesting when you put your head above the parapet. Whenever you put a podcast
Yes.
out there or you write a wee article, then all of a sudden your social media might come in for a bit of criticism. I remember about 2 years ago, maybe slightly more. Back to the idea of the First World War, I'd been helping out. You did Linda Irvine on the podcast,
Yeah.
and I'd been speaking to Linda Irvine on this particular occasion, and she had been telling me about how her and a group of others from Tourist, the Irish Language Centre in East Belfast, had been trying to gather the names from the 1911 census of people in East Belfast who spoke Irish.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's really interesting because of a similar period, I've been trying to gather the names of everybody who fought in the First World War from that same part of the world. I wonder if we cross-referenced them, could we find some people who fought in the First World War and spoke Irish? So a mini project sort of was born out of that, and we found a few dozen people, and within it there was interesting stories, and they published a website and a brochure, and there might have been a bit of a walking tour. I sort of left them to it. And that was a few years ago. But then about 2 years ago, I opened my Twitter one day, and my Twitter had blown up. Everybody sending condolences and solidarity with me and stuff. And I was like, what's going on here? It turns out a prospective TUV counsellor had called me out as a so-called researcher or a so-called historian. I can't remember her name. She didn't get elected. Her surname was Smith. But when I clicked into this article, and she was basically lambasting the research that we had done as somehow fabricated.
That was Fenian research?
Yeah, we were greening the idea of the Great War, I think was
Right.
what she was complaining about, and this sort of cabal of so-called researchers, of which I was one, you know. And as I say, then my Twitter was sort of filling up with people saying in solidarity and stuff. I found it quite funny. And then I bided my time, and then I waited to see how many votes that she got in the election, and it turns out I gained a few more followers from Twitter than she got votes in the election. So
Very good, very good. Yeah, because Twitter's not the best place to find your historical facts.
No.
It's very interesting. We're doing a long and the short of it about Irish neutrality, which will be out in April. And because of the Palestine issue, right? Every time Judaism is mentioned and Ireland's position on Palestine,
Yes.
because they tend to be more Palestinian, every single time you go on Twitter, the Republic of Ireland supported Hitler, wouldn't fight the Nazis and Irish neutrality, and the whole thing, and every single time there's an argument underneath about Irish neutrality and did they really support Hitler and were they fighting the fascists and blah 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 blah. And you just think, oh geez, this is not the best place to go for your historical fact. It just gets you annoyed, doesn't it?
It does. But yeah, the Republic did send condolences to Hitler. They weren't the only country to do so.
They weren't the only country to do so, but yeah, even De Valera's supporters said
coming up on this.
there's a very interesting program coming up on that. Yes, the long and the short of it, April 2026. But yeah, he did put on his top hat and go and express condolences to. Though he didn't apparently sign a book of condolences, but he did express condolences.
Yeah,
it wasn't a very wise
as did Sweden, as did a couple of other countries. We marked VE Day together in Belfast City Hall. I mean, we talked about some of these issues back in May.
Yeah. Irish neutrality, a very important subject.
No, it's very interesting because funny enough, I'm going from here to start cutting some more of it.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. No, it is actually. It's a really, it's not an area I knew very well. It is fascinating.
I think the long and the short is probably the only Irish history TV program on. Well, certainly BBC Northern Ireland does.
Yeah,
the Republic of Ireland. Are they doing any? They do the odd
they need to do more of them.
They do need to do more of them.
A lot more of them.
I probably get rid of David Hume. He's kind of annoying me. But if I got
keeps contradicting you.
It keeps contradicting me.
That's right.
But if I did it with Jason, it would have to be the long and the long of it. It wouldn't work.
It doesn't really work, does it?
Basically, we only have David Hume because of his height. That's the only
he's crucial to the whole enterprise.
It's a brilliant bit. We have him up in Derry, and we're interviewing him at this one of the big cannon there they have up on the walls, and he's actually shorter than the wheel of the cannon.
No, we make too many jokes about that man's height.
But there is something, for God's sake.
He is very good though. I have a lot of time
actually.
for David, and I have said this publicly, and I will say it again, that he's kind of changed my mind on a few things. And
Has he really?
He has.
No, do you
genuinely? I mean, I would have been slightly more black and white in my
Would you?
history, and particularly around things like the Orange Order and the history of the Orange Order and things like that, and the significance of the Orange Order to the Unionist community. I would have come from a certain nationalist background that was inimical to that organisation in all its shapes and forms. And there's more to it than that, I think. To be fair to David, and he's been very good. He's been very accommodating. He's very interested in 1798, which is interesting because a lot of Unionists don't like to talk about 1798 and the United Irishmen and all of that. And he comes from Ballycarry, and the grave, a couple of graves there. There's James Orr, the great Ulster Scot poet, who was a United Irishman. There was a guy, a young fella Nelson, who was hanged in 1798.
Right.
But he would say some Unionist politicians are very reluctant to talk about that bit of our Irish history.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult one for Presbyterians in particular to get their head around, isn't it? 1788, about how they go from sort of...
You started the Republican movement.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it's back to that idea of being out in community centres and talking about these things. You know, the Wolfe Tones, that the Henry John McCrackens of this world were Protestants. They were Presbyterians, and founding fathers of the Republican movement. And if I take you around Belfast City Cemetery, which I have, I'll take you to the grave of Reverend Richard Rutledge Kane, who on his obelisk, he's described as a loyal Irish patriot. And you can tell that story and loyalists' heads would explode, and you can tell the same story and Republicans' heads would explode. How do you get a loyal Irish patriot? But I think it speaks to a complex past when people had different senses of their identity.
Jason, it's been fascinating, and thank you very much for being on the Give My Head podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, support. You're still doing tours? Where do I find you, Jason?
So I've got a website, jasonburkehistory.com.
And are your feet sore?
Sometimes.
If you're a young female watching this, I'm sorry, he's taken. We'll go on the tour anyway, because they are fascinating. Genuinely, really enjoyed the one. The East Belfast one I really enjoyed about the First World War. Really, really fascinating. Jason, thank you very much for being on
Thanks
the
for having me.
podcast. The very best of good luck with everything you do. Read him in the Belfast Telegraph. Follow him online, Irish History, and your podcast. You're still doing the
Still do the podcast, Historical Belfast. You can find
Historic-
it on Spotify and Apple and all those. So we'll have a whole series of episodes coming up in 2026.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening and watching the Give My Head podcast. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.